Mr. Gray, the gods have been good to you, but what the gods give, they quickly take away. You have only a few years in which to live really, perfectly, and fully. When your youth goes, your beauty will go with it, and then you will suddenly discover that there are no triumphs left for you, or to have to content yourself with those mean triumphs that the memory of your past will make more bitter than defeats. Every month, as it wanes, brings you nearer to something dreadful. Time is jealous of you and wars against your lilies and roses. You will become sallow and hollow-cheeked and dull eyes. You will suffer horribly. Realize your youth while you have it. I'm ahead of the curve. Welcome back for another video. In this book review, I will be discussing Oscar Wilde's The Picture of Dorian Gray. Now, a bit of research indicates that it was actually first published in 1890, but it was actually a short sort of version of the piece, but the full-length version was then brought out a year later. So yeah, fun fact, I suppose. This is most well known as a philosophical novella, I guess you could say. It's a very psychological piece, and it's not actually the first time I've read it as well. I read this a few years ago, and I didn't kind of like it all that much. I mean, I did enjoy it, but I didn't feel that this was, I don't know, one of the better pieces that I read. I felt that there was something missing, and I felt that I would review it again, not only because I know that a lot of you like this book, or probably like this book, but I also found it to be much more enjoyable the second time round, which is interesting because I don't reread, or I haven't reread a lot of my books thus far, because over the past 4 years I've been reading new books. I usually read very small books or reread small books just because it's a lot easier to get through. I don't really want to reread some sort of Gulag Archipelago, which is like, what, 800 pages on the abridged edition. So if I do reread books, it's usually the short ones. For example, I do want to check out The Stranger by Camus again, but it's just down to which one I decide to read and when I decide to review it and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, and basically as I said, I preferred this on the second time reading. Now, to be honest, I wasn't really an avid reader when I first checked out the piece originally. I was sort of getting into classics at the time, and I suppose you would imagine my copy would be Penguin, but actually this one is Wordsworth Classics. I must say though, what I do like about this particular edition is that the footnotes actually have the page number on them, whereas Penguin editions don't, and it can be a bit of a pain to remember sometimes where you were exactly. So I suppose that's what it's got going for them, but yeah, I don't know, I don't really like the front cover as much. I mean, it's cool, I suppose, but it's not artistic. I think an artistic front cover would have been better for this book. But I think the reason why I preferred this piece the second time around though is because for a non-seasoned reader, you can kind of, read along, you can skim it, and you can be like, yeah, this is some interesting ideas, maybe a bit, I don't know, pretentious at times if you're not, that into reading, I guess you could say. But when I've read it after reading, what, like 200 more books since then, I have found that the writing was just so artistic, I suppose you could say. And I don't think I realised that the first time around. I was obviously enjoying it, but I didn't actually, I mean, as a writer myself as well nowadays, and back then I wasn't really, I just appreciate Oscar Wilde's style a lot more now that I've actually done some writing myself and read a lot more books. So I think that to the casual reader, you can obviously enjoy this, but also to the reader who's much more seasoned, maybe who writes themselves, I think there is so much more to get out of this very short piece because of these reasons. A theme that I found interesting through this piece was the debate between emotion and hard reason. Now, I'll read out a few sentences that I have highlighted It is only shallow people who require years to get rid of an emotion. A man who is master of himself can end a sorrow as easily as he can invent a pleasure. I don't want to be at the mercy of my emotions. I want to use them, to enjoy them, and dominate them. This is the kind of reason that you'd see in this sort of hard science kind of individual who just disregards the value of emotion and just puts all their money into the scientific, reasonable approach, which has its merits, of course, but emotion has its time and place as well. And obviously, these characters, the surroundings around them, and Henry especially, is influencing Dorian in the sense of, yeah, Henry trying to get Dorian to ignore how he feels, and to ignore those moral sort of values in place of this hedonistic approach to life, which was all too common at the time of this being written, and it fits in with the culture of this sort of, yeah, classical existential edgelords, you know, but just they're wearing suits instead of dark hoodies or trench coats. Another quote to illustrate this is the following: "The worship of the senses has often, and with much justice, have been decried. Men feeling a natural instinct of terror about passions and sensations that seem stronger than themselves, and that they are conscious of sharing with the less highly organised forms of existence. But it appeared to Dorian Gray that the true nature of the senses had never been understood, and that they remained savage and animal merely because the world has sought out to starve them into submission or to kill them by pain, instead of aiming to make them elements of a new spirituality of which a fine instinct for beauty was to be the dominant characteristic." So here we're talking about this sort of hedonistic, aesthetic desire, I suppose you could say. And when I say aesthetics, I mean to have the appearance of sincerity, but really underneath you're just this facade. And this facade idea is just rife throughout the piece, because as we know, Dorian Gray is a facade as he goes throughout the book. Well, I haven't actually explained the main premise, but I trusted you would know it, but I suppose I should never assume. But yeah, the central theme is Dorian Gray is this upper class guy, and he hangs around with these upper class men such as Henry, for example, and the painter Basil does a portrait of Dorian Gray, but this portrait is a strange sort of portrait, and yeah, it resembles Dorian's mental proclivity and his actions as he lives his life. And with this portrait as well, he doesn't age. He goes through his life without aging, but also, as I've discussed here, trying to preserve his youth, which is a central theme. But really, it just goes backwards. And he was becoming older, even though he didn't look older. He was decaying like an older person was, even though he was in his youth. And that's a testament to his mental state and how he knew what he was doing was wrong. He was just tricking himself into believing that it was right. A bit like Raskolnikov in Crime and Punishment by Fyodor Dostoevsky, which is there, yeah. Yes, I know I haven't reviewed that yet. I will reread that and review it for you guys. It's coming soon, somewhat. But yeah, it's this sort of character study of how somebody who has innately good values can be steered away from them in the desire of, I suppose, pleasure and aesthetics. And it's about the corrupted soul, how we can all turn to this dark side if we give the demons their day, basically. What I found entertaining as well throughout was just the nihilistic, hedonistic, existential sort of advice that Dorian's friends would give him, like Henry, for example, as I've mentioned. Yeah, my favourite parts of the book were just the dialogue between characters, I suppose you could say. Dorian sort of being a bit off of the ideas of which Henry and his friends are putting to him. These, as I said, hedonistic, dark, immoral sort of values that Dorian underneath knows are wrong. He becomes convinced of them so much because it's exposed to him so much. And as we know, psychologically speaking, the more that we are exposed to something, the more that we are likely to give in. And going back to this idea of immortality, now I may have mentioned this in previous videos, but I think that it's relevant here because the idea is that we want to be immortal, we want to stay alive, I suppose. And I know that a lot of you would recognize this already, but I think it's just an intriguing idea to sort of question whether we would want to actually be immortal or not, because if anyone's seen Interview with a Vampire, the film, or the book for that matter as well, or any of these films that or books that deal with immortality, they single-handedly every time debunk the idea that it would be a pleasurable experience, that it would be preferable in the slightest, right? Because it wouldn't be. Because your mind would obviously get older, but your body wouldn't. And so you just wouldn't fit in after 100 years or so. I mean, you'd have to be very, very adaptable. But the main point is that you lose everybody around you. And you, as I said, you become alone. This is why, you know, a lot of people have gone into this cryo sleep sort of state. They freeze themselves. I mean, a lot of people have actually paid millions of dollars to actually do this. They freeze themselves to then be woken up when the time is right and when the technology can actually get them from that frozen state. And so a lot of people have actually done it already. They are in cryo sleep already. And so a lot of people apparently are convinced that they even want to wake up in the distant future and to walk around. I mean, I guess for a field trip, that wouldn't be too bad, but not as a permanent state of your future self, because, well, my theory is that you just go insane. Everything around you would be different. Arguably, the languages would be different. I mean, obviously, it depends how far in the future that you go, but I really don't think that immortality is preferable or desirable at all. And this book really does deal with that idea. It deals with the idea that the youth is always found in how you act, not in what you physically, I suppose, have the appearance of. And that's the thing to master. Being old but having youth in you, right? That is the thing that we need to look for, instead of just the aesthetic sort of appearance that we're younger. I guess that helps as well if you're interested in that, but you get my point. It's more preferable to have youth in your age. Just wanted to comment, I suppose, briefly on this idea that, yeah, immortality is in some regard desirable. It really isn't. And yeah, this book is just a brilliant testament to that idea, as well as it is for the dangers of nihilism as well, and its implications, such as hedonism and this reason sort of based ethos, which overrides emotions. It says that emotions are, you know, anecdotal, and reason is much more in tune with science or whatever. And yeah, it is I guess, a prophecy that many people have actually fulfilled for themselves, finding reason to be the only path of living or the most preferable. Because reason, you know, emotions are difficult to deal with, of course, and nobody wants to at times. But the problem with reason is that you don't feel anything when you're reasonable, you know, or relying fully on reason. And that's why a balance is always key. So yeah, I mean, I'm at this point, I'm just spurting a lot of, conjecture, a lot of my ideas, but yeah, I just think this topic is really, really interesting. And the book just has so many themes, and because it's short as well, I would just 100% recommend anyone who hasn't read it already to check it out, because it's basically a novella. It's a very contained story, and there are some moments as well that it's hard not to keep on reading. And there are just some sentences as well that Oscar Wilde wrote just beautifully, absolutely just beautifully. And I believe that it was his only fiction book as well. So I might be completely wrong there, but yeah, it's a classic for a reason. So yeah, I do think that this book, on the second time round for me, I just enjoyed it much more. Yeah, I would just say go read it, and if you've already read it, then let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. And yeah, just to help out the algorithm as well, do like this video, because YouTube is kind of a mess these days. So yeah, just engage as much as you can with this video. Make sure you share it if you liked it as well, with anyone who you know read the book and so on. And yeah, the background is different. Well, it's not different, but the angle is different because I'm now in a new house and I'm still trying to work out what kind of background I should have. And yeah, I think this will do for now. But yeah, a lot of fiddling around with lighting and the filming, and which is probably why this review has been a bit messy. I don't know, maybe you don't think it was, but yeah, I'm just still trying to work out the setup, I guess, and yeah, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, yet another tangent, but I hope you enjoyed this video. I will be back with another review very soon. I've been Ahead of the Curve. Thank you very much for watching once again, and I will see you in the next review.